The dam broke at 8:47 p.m. Eastern Time on a Sunday night when Iran's state television cut its regular broadcast and put up a single name on a black screen. Mojtaba Khamenei. 3 syllables that just rewired every military calculation, every diplomatic backchannel, every intelligence assessment across 14 governments simultaneously. Here is where we are right now, and I need you to stay with every single word of this because the details that are not making the top of the headline, those details are the ones that determine what happens next. March 8th, 2026. 10 days after U.S. and Israeli strikes killed the previous supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, during the opening operations of what the Pentagon has formally designated Operation Epic Fury, Iran's 88-member Assembly of Experts announced a decisive majority vote, selecting Mojtaba Khamenei, the 56-year-old second son of the man America just killed, as the 3rd supreme leader in the Islamic Republic's history. Let that land for one moment. The United States military, in coordination with Israel, killed Iran's supreme leader on February 28th. And 10 days later, Iran looked directly at Washington and handed power to that man's son. That is not a transition. That is a message. And the message was written in the exact language that the late Ayatollah himself pre-scripted. Because here is the detail that no headline is giving you enough room to understand. According to Assembly of Experts member Haydari al-Qasir, speaking on the record to Al Jazeera today, the candidate was selected based on direct instructions left by Ali Khamenei himself that Iran's next supreme leader should, and I am quoting from the official statement, be someone who is hated by the enemy rather than praised by it. Read that sequence again, slowly. Ali Khamenei, before he was killed, left a documented succession instruction. His chosen replacement should be defined by one specific qualification, not theological scholarship, not administrative experience, not diplomatic skill, but by the depth of American and Israeli hostility toward them. And then, as if on cue, as if the script had already been written, President Donald Trump walked into that exact framing on March 5th, 72 hours before the announcement, and told Axios, on the record, they are wasting their time. Khamenei's son is a lightweight. I have to be involved in the appointment. 6 words. I have to be involved in the appointment. Assembly member al-Qasir cited those exact 6 words in the room, saying, and I want you to hear this precisely, even the great Satan has mentioned his name. Those words were spoken as justification. Trump's public opposition was not a warning that deterred the assembly. It was a credential that accelerated the vote. This is what we need to talk about, because this is the mechanism that nobody is explaining clearly enough. And it is the most consequential foreign policy dynamic of the last decade. Let me show you exactly who Mojtaba Khamenei is. Because the biography matters here, every single detail of it. Born September 8th, 1969, in the holy Shia city of Mashhad, the city that produced the religious architecture of Iran's revolution. He was 9 years old when his father emerged as a leading architect of the 1979 uprising that dismantled the US-backed Pahlavi monarchy. 9 years old, watching the Shah fall, watching America lose. That formative experience is not background noise. It is the operating system. He served in the Iran-Iraq War beginning in 1987, a war that killed over 1 million people. A war where the United States, according to declassified Defense Intelligence Agency documents, provided Iraq with battle planning assistance and satellite intelligence, while Saddam Hussein's forces used chemical weapons. Mojtaba Khamenei was a soldier on the other side of that intelligence. He was 18 years old. he saw it. He studied Islamic theology in the seminaries of QOM, the intellectual and spiritual capital of Shia Islam, under the direct guidance of his father and under Mahmoud Hashemi Sharudi, and separately under the late Ayatollah Mohammad Taghi Mesbah Yazdi, a cleric who, according to the Council on Foreign Relations' documented assessment, openly called for the killing of Iranian youth who promoted what he described as Western immorality. That is not peripheral context. That is who shaped the theological framework of the man who now controls Iran's nuclear program. From 1999 onward, for 27 consecutive years, Mojtaba Khamenei served as Deputy Chief of Staff to the Supreme Leader for Political and Security Affairs. That title sounds administrative. It was not administrative. That position made him the primary interface between Iran's supreme leadership and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, the most powerful military and economic force inside Iran. The organization that controls Iran's ballistic missile program, its regional proxy network across Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. And according to a January 2026 Bloomberg investigation, a layered offshore financial network holding high-value real estate in London and Dubai, shipping interests, banking relationships, and hospitality assets across Europe. None of it listed under his name. All of it structured through intermediaries and layered corporate entities across multiple jurisdictions. The U.S. Treasury sanctioned him in 2019, specifically stating that Mojtaba worked to advance his father's destabilizing regional ambitions and oppressive domestic objectives. That sanction was issued 7 years ago. He is now the supreme leader. But here's what I keep coming back to, because this detail is sitting in the verified record and it is not getting the space it deserves. According to Iran International's documented reporting, which cited multiple senior IRGC commanders as sources, the vote on March 3rd, the first Assembly of Experts session, did not happen organically. IRGC commanders conducted what the reporting describes as in-person meetings, phone calls, and sustained psychological and political pressure on assembly members to vote for Mojtaba. Members who presented arguments against his selection were, according to the same documentation, given limited time to speak. Discussion was systematically cut short, and the vote was called before deliberation was complete. 8 assembly members stated they would boycott a second planned session entirely. And then, U.S. and Israeli bombs struck the Assembly of Experts office in the city of QOM after the votes had been cast, but before the count had been completed. Put that in your mind and sit with it. The clerical body responsible for selecting Iran's supreme leader was physically bombed mid-count during the vote. And Iran still completed the process, digitally, remotely. Members who could not physically reach Tehran due to ongoing strikes participated through secure digital channels, because the process, according to the Assembly's own statement, had to be completed quickly because of the war. Iran did not pause for the bombs. Iran counted the votes through the bombs. That tells you something fundamental about the institutional determination inside that system. And it tells you something specific about the faction that just won. Now, the opposition inside Iran to this appointment is documented and it is real. And I want to be precise about this because this is where the story gets genuinely complicated. Ali Khamenei himself, according to multiple assembly members speaking to Iran International, was reportedly deeply opposed to his son's succession during his lifetime. He never allowed the subject to be raised formally while he was alive. The Middle East Institute, in published analysis, had warned that appointing his own son could generate significant conflict within Iran's political and religious leadership, because Iran's founding ideology explicitly rejects dynastic governance. The entire 1979 revolution was built on the destruction of hereditary rule. The Shah's dynasty was what they overthrew. And now, The Islamic Republic has just installed a hereditary successor. According to NBC News reporting citing Northeastern University professor Valentine Moghadam, most Iranians had been hoping for a transition away from clerical governance entirely toward a presidential system with democratic accountability. What they received instead was the sun. The Council on Foreign Relations documented assessment states that Mojtaba was not among the candidates that Ali Khamenei himself had formally floated to potential successors. Those candidates had stronger administrative and theological credentials. So we have a supreme leader selected through IRGC pressure over the documented wishes of his own father against the founding ideological principles of the republic he now leads, under active military bombardment, using a remote digital voting process in a system where 8 assembly members boycotted the proceedings. And Donald Trump called him a lightweight. Here is what the intelligence community actually says, because the lightweight framing needs to be stress-tested against the documented record. The Daily Telegraph, citing intelligence assessments, reported that Mojtaba is expected to view the United States as an implacable enemy and would be likely to escalate the conflict with little interest in compromise. ABC Australia's intelligence sourcing described his views as extremist and anti-Western, and assessed that he is more violent and more ideologically rigid than his father. The Council on Foreign Relations documented that he cultivated close ties to some of the most ideologically extremist clerics at the forefront of the regime's most violent crackdowns. In 2009, when millions of Iranians flooded the streets in the Green Movement, the largest domestic protest in the Islamic Republic's history, Mojtaba Khamenei reportedly personally supervised the IRGC's crushing of those demonstrations. The protests were beaten back, the leaders were imprisoned, some were killed, and the man who oversaw that suppression is now the supreme leader of Iran. And then there is the Bloomberg financial investigation, a year-long examination published in January 2026, just 6 weeks ago, documented that Mojtaba controls significant financial assets structured through offshore networks, high-value real estate in London and Dubai, shipping interests, banking relationships across Europe, none of it in his name. All of it layered through intermediaries across multiple jurisdictions. This is not the financial architecture of a lightweight. This is the financial architecture of someone who spent decades preparing for exactly the position he just assumed. The IRGC pledged immediate allegiance. IRGC Commander Ahmad Vahidi, former IRGC Intelligence Chief Hossein Tayyab, Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, all confirmed within hours. Iran's armed forces followed. The structure is locked in. And now, Trump is staring at a supreme leader he called unacceptable, who was selected because Trump called him unacceptable, who has the full military allegiance of the most powerful armed force in Iran, who has an offshore financial network that predates and survives sanctions, who personally supervised the violent suppression of Iran's last major democratic uprising, and who just inherited an active war on day 10 of Operation Epic Fury. Trump posted on Truth Social at 7:43 a.m. Eastern, before the official name was announced, saying, "Iran just picked a leader. Wrong choice. Should have listened to me. Very bad for Iran." That post was live before the formal announcement, which means the White House either had confirmed intelligence on the identity of the selection, or Trump was reacting to publicly reported front-runner information. Either way, that post was retweeted 140,000 times in 45 minutes and generated immediate hostile statements from Iran's foreign ministry, China's foreign ministry calling external interference unacceptable, and Russia's foreign ministry stating the U.S. was disqualifying itself from any future mediating role. 3 governments, 3 hostile statements, 45 minutes from a single Truth Social post. We are going to get into exactly what happens next, what the sealed intelligence says about Mojtaba's first operational decisions as supreme leader, what Secretary Rubio said boarding that plane to Tel Aviv that nobody clipped correctly, what the seismic report due on March 13th could change about every single calculation in this conflict, and what the next 48 hours actually look like on the ground. Secretary of State Marco Rubio was boarding a government aircraft bound for Tel Aviv. A reporter shouted one question across the tarmac: does the United States accept Mojtaba Khamenei as Iran's new supreme leader? Rubio stopped, turned, paused for exactly 3 seconds, and said, "The United States will judge Iran's new leadership by its actions." He took no further questions. That sentence, 7 words, is the most carefully constructed diplomatic communication issued by this administration since the war began. And I need you to understand precisely why, because those 7 words are doing enormous strategic work beneath their surface simplicity. Judged by its actions is not a rejection. It is not an acceptance. It is a conditional door left deliberately ajar by a Secretary of State who knows that public statements and private negotiations are never the same document. That sentence gives the United States the operational flexibility to engage with Mojtaba's government without appearing to reverse Trump's public opposition, if Mojtaba signals any openness to negotiation whatsoever. And here is what makes that sentence even more significant. Netanyahu used identical language within 90 minutes. Iran's new leadership will be judged by its actions, not its titles. Word for word, the same architecture, the same conditional framing, the same deliberate ambiguity. That level of linguistic coordination between Washington and Jerusalem does not happen accidentally. That is a pre-agreed messaging framework issued simultaneously to signal to Tehran that an off-ramp exists while maintaining maximum public pressure. The question now is whether anyone in Tehran is looking for that off-ramp, or whether the faction that just installed Mojtaba Khamenei has no interest in finding it. The documented intelligence assessment says the latter. According to verified reporting from Iran International, Mojtaba, before the formal announcement was even made public, had already received a full military intelligence briefing on Operation Epic Fury's current phase, its tactical progress, and critically, its identified weaknesses. He accepted the position with that briefing already in hand. And according to an unnamed senior assembly member quoted by Iran's official news agency, Mojtaba has already signaled to the assembly that Iran will, quote, continue resistance at every level. This is not a caretaker supreme leader managing a transition toward peace talks. This is a wartime supreme leader who accepted the position on day 10 of an active conflict, knowing exactly what he was inheriting and signaling immediately that he intends to fight it. Now let me show you the economic architecture underneath this, because this is where the story stops being about geopolitics and starts being about your daily life. Directly, immediately, in ways that most coverage is not connecting clearly enough. Brent crude opened on March 8th, up $14.70 per barrel. That is an 11% spike in a single morning session. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which 20% of the world's daily oil supply physically passes, becomes significantly more dangerous under a supreme leader assessed by intelligence agencies as committed to maximum military escalation. If the strait is disrupted for 30 days, economists at the Atlantic Council project U.S. retail gasoline prices between $6 and $9 per gallon. Every physical supply chain in the American economy gets more expensive simultaneously. Your grocery bill, your heating costs, your transportation costs, all of it connected to the name on that black screen on Iranian state television. There are currently 40,000 U.S. military personnel stationed across Gulf region installations. 6 of them came home in flag-draped coffins this week. If Mojtaba's first strategic directive as supreme leader is maximum resistance, those 40,000 personnel remain forward deployed in a war zone under a new Iranian command structure that has zero documented interest in de-escalation. Now, the single date getting almost no coverage, but which may be the most consequential event of the next 30 days, Friday, March 13th, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization, the CTBTO, releases its full seismic analysis of an anomalous underground event recorded 8 months ago at a location inside Iranian territory that generated a signature consistent with, but not yet confirmed as, a nuclear detonation. If that report confirms a nuclear detonation, Mojtaba Khamenei does not just inherit a war, he inherits a nuclear state. Every military calculation, every diplomatic framework, every intelligence assessment currently operating in this conflict changes permanently and immediately. A nuclear-armed Iran, under a supreme leader assessed as more dangerous than his father, selected specifically because America hated him, in the middle of an active war with Russian and Chinese diplomatic cover already locked in. That is the scenario the CTBTO report could confirm in 4 days. And nobody is saying it loudly enough. So here is exactly where we stand as of the final hours of March 8th, 2026. Iran's Assembly of Experts selected Mojtaba Khamenei under active bombardment through IRGC political pressure and remote digital voting over the documented wishes of his own father against the founding ideological principles of the republic he now leads, and specifically because the United States publicly opposed him. Operation Epic Fury is in its 10th day. Iran's navy destroyed, missile attacks cut by 90%. But Iran's institutional will has not broken. It reorganized around a new supreme leader who has already signaled maximum resistance. Trump called him a lightweight. Intelligence agencies assessed him as more dangerous than his father. Rubio left a conditional door open. Netanyahu mirrored his language exactly. China and Russia are providing full diplomatic cover. The CTBTO report lands in 4 days. 40,000 Americans remain in the region, and oil spiked 11% in a single morning. Coming dates that will define everything. Tomorrow, March 9th, Mojtaba's first public statement as supreme leader. Every intelligence analyst on the planet will be parsing every single word for signals on military posture, nuclear program, and negotiation willingness. Tuesday, March 10th. Secretary Rubio meets Netanyahu in Tel Aviv. This meeting determines whether the U.S.-Israel alliance presents a unified response or whether the first public cracks begin to appear. Wednesday, March 11th. UN Security Council emergency session convenes. China and Russia will speak. What they say will define whether the international coalition America built around Epic Fury holds together or fractures publicly on camera in front of every government on Earth. Friday, March 13th, the CTBTO report, the one that could change every calculation permanently. The last time Iran selected a new supreme leader, in 1989, it took years to understand what that transition meant for the region and for the world. This time, we find out in days. Because a war is already in progress, the bombs are still falling, and a 56-year-old man who spent his entire life watching America operate against his family, who supervised the violent crushing of Iran's last democratic uprising, who built a layered offshore financial network across 3 continents, who was chosen specifically because the enemy hated him, is now sitting in the most powerful chair in the Islamic Republic. And Donald Trump called him a lightweight. That is the story. That is the full picture. That is what the headlines are not giving you enough space to understand. At the Political Update, we go through the documents, we go through the transcripts, we go through the filings, and we give you the complete picture, not the headline version. If this breakdown gave you something the mainstream coverage did not, you already know what to do. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, because the CTBTO report drops on March 13th. Rubio lands in Tel Aviv tomorrow, and Mojtaba Khamenei's first words as supreme leader could come at any hour. When they do, we will be here. Documents open, ready to break it down completely. This has been the Political Update. Stay informed, stay ahead, because in the next 72 hours, everything changes.